Welcome to Working Class Hollywood, conversations with people that make the movies, TV shows, and entertainment you love. If you're looking to break into or move up in the entertainment industry, or you're just a fan of content and want to hear about how it's made, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Jeremiah Smith.
If you're not that person that's showing that portfolio and getting immediately hired and getting into whatever you're trying to do, don't be afraid to try and get in there and do everything else. Don't be afraid to take that PA position somewhere. In fact, be the best freaking PA on the set. Like when I was doing that, I was the first one in the building every morning and shut off all the lights on the way out. I didn't have to be. And the producers saw that, the animators saw that, and then people want to help you when that's who you are.
My guest today is Zac Moncrief. Zac has been working in television animation for over 20 years. He directs, produces, writes, animates. He does it all. He's worked on shows such as Family Guy and Phineas and Ferb. I was excited to sit down with Zac because I know nothing about animation. And Zac did such a good job explaining to me how these animated shows come together from, getting the script, breaking the story, and seeing it through all the way to the finished product. Zac is such a fun, energetic and friendly guy. I really enjoyed talking to him, and I think you are going to enjoy my conversation with animator Zac Moncrief. I'm here with Zac Moncrief, my neighbor.
Yeah, a long journey to get here today.
We made a lot of dad jokes about using Waze to get here. Zac literally lives across the street, and that's how I met you. Just literally, I think, walking down the street, or just kind of
probably
saw
when
you.
You first moved in, we probably came over and said, hey, and even though I live across the street, I was 15 minutes late. So.
Exactly. And then, so what led to me asking you to be on this podcast is one of the moms of the kids that my oldest son goes to school with. She works for The Simpsons. I think she's a director or something for that show, and somehow we got on the topic, and your name came up, and she literally was like, "Whoa, Zac's a big deal in the animation world."
I don't know about that. Maybe a big because of my size. I'm not sure if that's exactly what she meant by it. Yeah, I mean, I've been working in the industry for over 20 plus years now. So when you do that and you're lucky enough to stay in this world for that long, you get to work on some amazing stuff. I've worked on some really great shows, and I'm sure we'll probably dive into. Yeah,
you have a ton of great credits, and you seem like you have a really interesting backstory through it all. So I like to always start at the beginning.
Sure.
So where are you from?
Okay.
And how'd you end up in LA?
I originally grew up back on the East Coast in New Jersey, right outside of New York State, right on the New York State border. And as a kid, like most kids in this industry, or most people in this industry, I drew a lot when I was a kid. I was drawing Charlie Brown and Snoopy as early as I can remember. And as I got older and continued to follow my art, I was actually at the DMV getting a moped license. Yay, mopeds.
A moped license?
Yes. Do you know what a moped is?
I mean, yeah, it's like a motorcycle with pedals. It's got like a 20cc engine on it or
Definitely
something.
Not a chick magnet for sure on that. But you know what? It got me around and got me for what I needed to do. But I was taking a test at the DMV for that. And this guy saw me drawing, and he mentioned this school out here in California called California Institute of the Arts.
Yeah.
School started originally by Walt Disney.
CalArts, they call it, up in Santa Clarita, right?
Yep, up in Valencia, California. And the second I was told about that and knew that there was a school that actually could help, not only was I drawing comics at the time, but I was a giant animation dork. I loved and grew up on the old Bugs Bunny Warner Brothers cartoons. And at that time, we had just had Roger Rabbit come out. So
love Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, and it's like encapsulating that kind of Warner Brothers energy, but with some really quality animation and filmmaking. And it kind of kicked me in the butt and was like, wow, this is what I want to do. And was lucky enough to get accepted into CalArts and came on out here back in 89. That's how old I am. And I've never really gone back. I've gone back for the summers to visit my family, but that's where I started getting involved in this industry and have not turned back since. I was very fortunate to get into that school.
And is that school, because I've heard a lot about CalArts, and I had a friend growing up that was his dream in life was to be an animator for Disney, and I think he ended up going to CalArts, or maybe he applied and didn't get in. I can't remember. But so that's sort of the school that's just known for being like, if you want to work in animation, that's the school that you go to, right? Are there other schools, or is that kind of it? Is that the sort of gold standard of animation schools?
I would still say there's other schools that have come along since then that have gotten some really great acknowledgement for what they can do. Fullerton, from what I understand, has gotten really strong. There's a school called, I'm going to probably say this wrong, Gobelin up in Canada or something. But CalArts has still always been, and especially at that time when I went, I mean, we didn't have DVD commentaries and we didn't have very many books to look at. It was the school, and everyone that teaches at that school, even today, are working professionals in the industry.
Yeah.
So you're getting access to people that are going to do this from 9 to 5 during the day and then are driving up to Valencia and spending a couple hours with you, sharing not only what they learned when they were at CalArts, if they went there, or just sharing the knowledge that they were getting on the day-to-day ins and outs of the actual working in the studio. So you can't touch that kind of experience, of exposure anywhere else in the country. Like, it was amazing. And, you know, the people that are running some of the top shows and films in this industry are still people that either I went to class with or that have come out of that school. Again, I'm not knocking other schools. I think RISD, I think, is also good. Like, there's a bunch of schools around the country that have gotten really strong with their animation and their film. It's a film school first and foremost, right? That's what we're learning to make. We just can do it with our drawing abilities, not just with a camera and actors. So that being said, that's why California Institute of the Arts is still as strong as it can be. It's one of the top-notch schools out there. And it's also when I look at a resume of somebody that's coming in and applying for a job, I know if they have that on their resume, I know what they went through to get to whatever year they graduated.
Right.
Every year we're making our own films. We're learning every area. I know what's in the water there and can understand where they're coming from, whereas other schools have different ways of teaching. But I know it's kind of like going through any kind of basic training together. You kind of know what you had to go through to get there, right?
Yeah.
So
let me ask you this, because I grew up, I was a big fan of comic books, and I did go through a period where I drew a lot, but I like fucking sucked at it. Like, I was just like the worst drawer, if that's a word. And I would just like sit there for hours and hours and try to draw these characters, and they just never looked good. Do you think that is just like an innate ability? Do you think it's a part of your brain that you're just born with? Like, why are some people good drawers and some people aren't good drawers?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that too, because it's something I still struggle with. A lot of artists that I've talked to, even some of the ones that I wish I could do what they do, have the same kind of feeling that we all kind of suck. We all look at our own artwork at times and are like, man, I suck. I'm nowhere near where I need to be. And it's what drives us to get better and better and better. But there's people like when I got to CalArts, the first day I was there and looked at the talent that was around me, first of all, I thought it was a joke that I was just there to be like, I'm on some hidden camera show that they're just going to be laughing at me. But some of those guys, not to take away the drawing that they did, they drew all the time. But some of them just have this magic thing inside them that it just they kind of click with it sooner. But I do believe that I'd love to try it someday. I do believe that anyone can kind of learn to draw if they work at it enough and work at the skill over and over and over again.
I mean, I tried to draw Bart Simpson at least 1,000 times, so I feel like I worked on it.
And you still didn't feel like you ever got it?
Never really. It's always
but
just
you know what it also is too?
disproportioned.
But I think that's it too, is that you start to learn the tricks. And that's something where I'm struggling right now. I'm getting ready to start working on a Peanuts thing for Apple next week. Or I'm sorry, 2-3 weeks from now. And so I'm trying to understand how to draw those characters the way Charles Schultz originally did. And I'm trying to look at these drawings and, yeah, I can draw my own version of them, but I want them to look as though he drew them. And so trying to break that down and understanding like how to dissect that to make sure that you do get it to have the proportions that look right. Because that's what it's all about, right? It's about where these rules of, that nose always falls in the center of the muzzle. Although if you don't break it down and study it and figure that out, you might not realize that. there are people in this industry that are better at seeing that right off the bat. And for me, I have to sit there and kind of almost mathematically kind of break it down a few times to see what's really going on there to try and understand it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it, though. I think if you have that innate ability, I think some of the better ones just see it right away. Like I know people that just understand design like rules that just come naturally to them, right? I think we talk about that too with film directors and creators that cinematography, like people that are masters of cinematography. Yeah, I'm sure they learned the rules of thirds and they learned all about the golden rule and all this stuff. But some of them just do it naturally, right?
Yeah.
They just have that, and that's just because when they've looked at film or they've looked at photos, something registered with them that you and I have to be taught how to understand that, right?
Right. Yeah, there is just talent, right?
Yeah.
Some people just have talent. And clearly, so you had enough talent to get into CalArts.
Sure.
What happened, how did you end up getting your first job? Did they have like an internship program or like a job placement thing at the school?
So they don't necessarily, but they know the school is known for what they're strong at, right? So all the different studios in the industry will come to them. There's a producer show that they have at the end of every year that anyone can go to, by the way, and it showcases some of the most talented artists at the end of that year from all the different grade levels. And when I started there, they told me right away, they're like, you can stay here for 4 years if you want to and get your degree, but most everyone will be gone over the sequential years because it's just such a hot demand industry.
Oh, interesting.
And the school is where everyone's coming to. So there was people leaving during my first year, people that left at the end of my first year, second year. I went back for 3 years because I wanted to try and get a little more education out of it, but I wasn't committing for the full 4. That's a longer, different story. But at the end of that third year, there was a new studio that was starting up called Turner Feature Animation. And they did a film called The Pagemaster and Cats Don't Dance. And anyone that's a animation dork out there will probably know of Cats Don't Dance if they don't know of The Pagemaster. Pagemaster was live action and animated feature. And they started an internship program where they took 20 some odd students from CalArts and put them through this whole wonderful summer-long training program. We were paid. We did our own little animation tests. We learned how to do layout and animation and like working on all those skills because they wanted to see what we had, and they could then push us into these different into the different departments to work on the movie.
Yeah.
So that was technically my first into the industry. Out of the 20 some odd people, maybe 15 or 16 of them, you'll get where the story is going to, were hired right into animation and cleanup in between jobs, and the rest of us weren't. And so I was like, well, I want this industry and this to work in this industry and be part of it any way I can. So I climbed into production right away. So my first real official job on any film was I was working in the production side of things. And I said, well, maybe art isn't for me. I'm going to keep working on it. I'm going to take this production route and climb that route, and started climbing that side of the company into higher positions along production while staying till 2, 3 in the morning every night, taking over an animator's desk, just working on my skills until finally I was given a chance to work on an animated a character. So,
and that was at the same company that you were doing that?
Yes, that was all at Turner Feature. And at the same time of doing that, so not only was I doing production during the day and understanding and learning all about that side of the industry, at night, like seriously, like 6 o'clock, animators would leave, 6:30, 7 o'clock. I would go into their offices from 7 till 1 or 2 in the morning, just working on what I knew I needed to work on, but also was working on, with another person, a pitch for a short for Cartoon Network that, like, almost within a month or two after getting the first artistic job I had on that film, went and sold the short to Cartoon Network, and then was jumping into TV immediately. Like, all of a sudden, like, things just started happening and started running. And part of it, if we're going to talk about what is advice for people. It's like, don't ever give up is the number one thing. I kept working my butt off. I barely ever slept. CalArts taught me that anyway. We would stay up until all hours of the night working, and just kept on. And still to this day, I work all the time. I'm just a workaholic because I enjoy what I'm doing. You know?
Yeah, I think you bring up something that I think is important to sort of emphasize, and it's something that I did as well. Where, if you're working inside of a production company or whatever company, whatever business it is, normal working hours, all that equipment and, the computers and software and everything is for the people that are getting paid to do it and working on, whatever the project is. But after everyone goes home, like, those are all empty, vacant things worth thousands of dollars with like stuff that you could sit down on. And so I wanted to learn Avid Media Composer.
Oh, cool.
Because I work in television and we cut everything on Avid. So I wanted to learn Avid. I was working at a production company in development. Had no business touching a computer with Avid on it, but I wanted to learn. And so I asked the post supervisor at the company. I was like, hey, can I, after everyone goes home, can I stay and just like fiddle around with an Avid? And I like bought a book, to like walk me through it and everything. He's like, yeah, man, of course, no worries. And so, yeah, for like a month or 2 months or whatever, I sat there and like, I'd say to you, just like stay late, work on Avid. And like the amount of jobs that I've gotten, because I know Avid Media Composer, or the amount that I've been able to contribute to whatever shows I'm working on through the years because of that skill, like it just like, it is like reaped so much benefit. So that's just a cool thing to know that is available to you, like to do,
Well, that's the thing, especially the other thing that's important about that too is showing the hunger at there as well, right? Like when I got that job, I did that internship program. It didn't work out for me and a bunch of people. We didn't get the artistic positions. I still was like, I don't care. I'm going to do what I have to because I want to be part of this, right? People will also really respond well to if you're not annoying about it, but that hunger. People knew that I was staying late and working. People saw what I was working on. I would still, without being an annoyance to anybody, every once in a while be like, hey, can you take a look at this? Can you give me any pointers on this? Because people want to share. If you're excited about doing what they do, they're going to want to do that with you. They're going to want to share that knowledge with you. So that's that what you just talked about is exactly it. Showing that you have a desire and that you're going to do more than just wait for the job to be handed to you.
Right.
Learning on your own or trying to, and then building that connection with someone too is like part of it, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's like part of the magic of the whole thing.
Totally.
So, and going in through that, so not only did I have the luxury of working in the production side of things for a while, for almost 2 years, and seeing how that worked. And like I said, I climbed up a little bit into higher level positions there. But when I started in feature animation, I started at the bottom, like the cleanup in between. Like that's the entry level position. Same thing when I sold a short, it was I'm creating now and directing and boarding. But I had some of that knowledge already from what I had done at CalArts. It was a little different of a beast in TV. But then right after that, I started off, and just to kind of segue into where we're going, I started off on the bottom again, like storyboarding in television, and made my way on through enjoying and learning as much as I could on up that chain to where I've now been able to be in producer level roles on shows.
Yeah. So I know literally nothing about animation.
Okay.
I did. One of my friends is a writer for American Dad. So he's talked to me. He was actually the first guest that they had on this podcast, episode 1,
cool.
Joe Chandler, if you want to hear it. So he's talked to me just from a writer's perspective of how they, will break the story and write the scripts, and then it's like from his perspective, and then it goes to the animators and then it goes bye. So that's you. So maybe just you mentioned a few terms and positions in there.
Oh, sure.
So what does cleanup mean? Like what is so that entry level position that you got at was that still on the Pagemaster movie?
Yeah. Well, and that was on Cats Don't Dance, where I had that official title. Okay. So real quick, not to get boring or technical, there's feature films and there's TV animation, right? Let's separate those into those two categories for now. Features, especially at that time, was all hand-drawn animation here in the States.
Yeah.
Now most of what we're seeing is CG, right? It's all 3D, it's all computer-generated. That still takes an animator to, believe it or not, they'll still draw tons of their posing out before they even start to move those characters around in the 3D world. That's a whole other story. In features, when I got into it, cleanup in-betweening was taking these main poses that animators would create. They'd do rough drawings of you sitting here and you grabbing your drink, and then maybe the pose of you with the glass up to your mouth. We would have to sit there and do all of the in-betweens, the frames that kind of move that drawing from one to the other, and make them really nice, clean, pretty drawings. So it's a very beginner level because you're not in charge of these main poses, these beautiful poses that have all this attitude and gesture to them, and timing, and understanding how long it'll take for that glass to get up to someone's mouth. And sounds all boring. I'm so sorry, but
no, it's not boring.
But the job for me at that time was, okay, there's these drawings that have to go in between that to move from here, right? You know, film is technically is 24 frames a second,
frames
right?
per second.
Video is 30 frames a second. So if it's going to take me from drawing 1 to drawing 12 to get that glass up there, there's all those drawings in between that need to be done.
Right.
And there's rules about that, following arcs and following timing. Drawings are closer or further away. So I'm learning on the most basic level, understanding principles of animation and drawing on a level that's important, but nowhere near as important as the main key drawings that are being done.
Right. You're not making the creative decisions of what's going to be in the frame and what it's going to look like, but you're just kind of connecting the moments and the gestures and postures.
And trying to make sure that movement is fluid and that volume stay the same. And like, there's so many things that no one we can look at. The funny thing is we can look at films that are old classics that we can look at, and I could slow them down and be like, look at all these mistakes here that no one even notices, right? But the more we've gotten involved with what we are watching, and we're in a society now that people can stop, freeze frame, and go frame by frame to look at stuff, it's important to make all those things as tight as they can be. So that's where I started.
Yeah, doing cleanup for the feature film.
Right. But then when I moved into TV, after doing my own short, and we can talk about that if you want to, but the first entry-level thing is either a storyboard revisionist or storyboard artist. Okay. And what that job is, for anyone that might not know what that is it's taking the script that the writers have created and the showrunner has approved and is all ready to go, and trying to visualize that onto paper. Depending on what show you're on and how they run it, sometimes a director will sit there and thumbnail out. Thumbnails are like little scratchy, simple drawings, stick figure type drawings to kind of show what they're thinking about for shots and staging and composition and flow. But a lot of shows, especially then, it was like, here's your script, you go board it, and you meet with your director to show them what you're doing. You do your first really rough pass of, here's what I'm thinking, and here's how I'm interpreting this, and adding visual gags, and trying to take that script and translate it into a visual form like a comic book would look like, right? Mm-hmm. But while also sitting there going, all right, what's the best way to stage this joke? Or what's the best way to stage this action or this fear or whatever is going, and using all of your tools from film knowledge of understanding how you're going to set up those shots. And it's a stage that just goes in layers as to getting stronger and better and tighter along the way. First one might be little stick figure thumbnail drawings that I'm doing on the side of the script. And you meet with the director and you go through them and you kind of pitch some gags or ideas, or sometimes you might even see something like, wow, I know I love the writer and they're super talented at what they're doing here, but this doesn't sound exactly right. Or can we add this line maybe and try and punch this up? And depending on who and what show you're on, that can be another area that everyone gets to add to the entire piece, right?
Right.
So that's kind of, in boring sense, that's where it starts.
So what were you working on when you started working in TV, when you were doing this storyboarding?
So for anyone that's 9,000 years old out there, the first actual show that I boarded on was Johnny Bravo. I don't know if anyone knows that show or not, but
I'm sure, yeah. I remember the show.
It's a big, iconic show from the 90s. So the short that I created was with a whole bunch of other show creators for a show that was called What a Cartoon. It was done at Hanna-Barbera Cartoon Network. And it was a series of pilots, basically, shorts, that then the ones that did really well got spun off into series. So a show called Dexter's Lab came from there. Powerpuff Girls came from there. Johnny Bravo came from there. Anyway, a bunch of other shows came from that same series, and creators that went on to just continue. They're freaking mammoths in the industry right now, right? Like there's people that came through that program that are just killing it out there.
What was it called? What a Cartoon
is what the show was called. You can look them up on YouTube. You can even see.
So they were like TV show episodes that had like some like different shorts in them.
So it'd be three 7-minute shorts per episode. And the idea was brilliant. It was just to get tons of pilots done and see what kind of response they got.
Ideas and talent in the door. And
they were created by the guy who was running the studio at the time, Fred Seibert, was brilliant in the fact that he ran this thing with letting the artists do what they did. So he'd have all these artists come and pitch them shows, and Fred was smart enough to get out of the way and let the creators create their shows. Because either they were going to succeed and go off the charts, and then he knew, like, wow, I don't have to hold this person's hand for a series, or they were going to struggle and drop and bomb, and he's like, well, then that wasn't the right creator or show to begin with either.
Right.
So it was really he was so hands-off. He did that same thing again at Nickelodeon a few years later, and we got Fairly Odd Parents out of that, which is a show that ran for I don't know, 10 or 15 years or something. So it's a system that kind of worked really well in the industry. So that was my first job, was working on Johnny Bravo doing storyboards.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And what's like the general path of an animator, through, because most of your work has been in television, right?
Yes. Once I kind of finished, I had done that bit with Cats. I actually went back there for a little bit just to help them finish out the film, but then I came back over into TV and stayed there the entire time.
So what's like the general path of an animator through, starting at, storyboarding, into...
And it depends on what people want to do, because there's so many different fields in there, right? But if you're someone who has aspirations of either having your own show or directing or going to that upper tier kind of showrunner level type positions, then that is where you start. You start in storyboards, because you have to understand how to visually create a story, right? That's what we're doing. How to work with a script, how to work with some of the shows I also worked on, a show called Phineas and Ferb. We worked from outlines. So instead of getting a 17 or 22 or whatever page script, where writers have gone over a script multiple times and figured out exactly, these are all the jokes, and this is the arcs, and these are the characters, and these are stories A, B, and C all happening at the same time. Phineas was a show that was done as premise driven. So they would come up with just a 1.5 page outline of, here's the story, and then the board artist, along with the director, would sit there and kind of make that all work in board form. So board artists are now writers as well as storyboard artists, so they get to flex those muscles a little bit, right? But that's kind of the path that you start to go through. The more you understand and can break out and understand how to storyboard and how to translate what's on the page written-wise into a visual thing that works, you then continue to move up that chain. You'd move into assistant directing or directing. It would be the next tier on that.
So what is a director of an animated television show do different from, the storyboarder, or just because in my mind, I'm like so naive about all this. I'm like, well, there's the guys that like draw it, and then it goes on TV like that. And obviously it's much more complicated than that.
So again, I'm going to try my best to make this as entertaining as possible, but the directors are different on different shows. So I also had the luxury of working on Family Guy for 2 seasons when it had its kind of big resurgence coming back. DVD sales were so amazing that even though the show had been canceled twice, DVD sales went through the roof, and they brought it back in this big giant amazing time. And I got so lucky to work on 2 seasons of that. That show, for example, as a director, I would get the script and I would launch that off with my storyboard artist, as an assistant director and board artist, where we would sit there and talk through the script together. I would kind of, again, like I was talking about, sometimes I would thumbnail out some ideas early on for them to say like, hey, here's kind of an idea of how I see this playing out. I see the characters moving left or right. I see the staging being this way. I see, let's get camera angles here to really kind of sell this moment, or keep it really flat and wide because I really want this joke to play out this way. But beyond that, and beyond looking at their storyboards when they came back in, they would come through me first before they went all the way up to Seth MacFarlane at the time.
And are you, as a director, are you in charge of an episode? Are you in charge of like are you the director for the series? Like, how many directors are there?
So in director level on Family Guy, I think I was doing 3 or 4 episodes a season. And there was probably 4 or 5 of us directing those episodes.
So it's kind of divvied up.
It was amazing. It was amazing. Like, we'd have 3 or 4 months to do an episode. Now, you would have overlap happening towards the end of one of those. So we would get that board. We would start it off. I would launch it off with board artists. It would come back through me. I'd note it. We'd get fixes. It would go through a supervising director who's overseeing all the shows on the series. Uh-huh. It would go through Seth, who would give his notes. We'd continue to revise it and fix it. I'm just giving the shortened version. We'd screen it and get even more notes, and you just keep chopping away at making this thing as tight as you could before, and the next questions I know where they're going to come from are, before we would ship it overseas to be animated.
Well, that was my next question. So does that mean, are there people like drawing all these things? And yes. I do know there's a thing called an animatic, right?
Okay, yes.
So yeah, how is it actually being animated?
After we draw all the storyboards, which is obviously again, every show does it differently. We were lucky on Family Guy when we were able to have all the vocal tracks ahead of time. Because think about it, right? When you're posing out and you're acting and you're giving attitudes or you're thinking about your cuts, having a radio play, which is what they would create for us to kind of work from, was awesome because you kind of could hear, you could see your cuts in your head by listening to that dialogue. Oh, you need to be close on them or wide on them or whatnot. So after the board was drawn, we would then create an animatic. And that's by taking all of your storyboard drawings and mashing them up with the recorded dialogue to kind of see how it's all playing out, right? Sometimes you'd add some music or some little sound effects to kind of sell some ideas. But it's basically like the first version of the animated show that you're looking at. And it's so efficient because animation takes so long to draw. Like we were talking about earlier, right? On the simplest version, it's 12 drawings per second at the easiest, right? You'll have every 2 frames, you'll have a new drawing on like traditional TV animation. To do all that drawing, all that coloring, all that painting, all that whatever, and not know where you're going yet would be a waste of time and money, right? These things take, so one other thing too, when we would ship a show off to overseas, and I'll get to that in a second, to get it actually animated and colored and come back to us, that's a 6-month process.
Wow.
So if you're realizing it's taking that much to do a 22-minute show of animation, you kind of can't, like, you got to be moving into the right direction before you even ship anything.
Right, before you're really animating it.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, just to explain that too. So just for everyone that doesn't understand this, after we do all the pre-production for shows here, that means everything up through design and storyboards. So all the scripts, all the recordings, all the designs of characters. And that's something, again, on Family Guy, there's an established style that's been there from day one, right? But if we have a caricature of you or a new character, a new woman, a new man coming into the show, I would be overseeing that with the character designers. I may do a quick idea of a sketch of what that might look like ahead of time so that not only do we use them in our board artists, but it gives the designers a starting point. Sometimes it would be the opposite. I'd go to them and say, I have no idea. I'm looking for someone that's, from what I understand, Seth wants an older person who's in his 70s and maybe has this kind of brim hat or whatever, and we'd work together on it. So as a director, I was looking at design as well. So not only the line art of the design, but then color as well. So when I got my animatic approved and I got all of our storyboards approved, we would then go to a design review where we'd see all the characters and all the backgrounds, so the environments that they're in, all the line art and all the color of that to see if it all was working before we sent this overseas for everyone to animate.
So once it's done, the story is locked, animatics, everything, is there. You actually just like ship a package to India, and there's like companies in India that just like animate it. Yeah.
So India, Korea, Japan, Canada's really big right now too. All over the place. There's China, every country you can think of out there that unfortunately has labor that will work a lot cheaper than we will here is where they're getting this kind of animation and that next stage done. It's more labor intensive, and so back in the 60s, I think, maybe 70s, Hanna-Barbera, a studio that created some of the classic shows on TV, found out that, wow, we could get a lot more for our money if we had these overseas doing this part of the job. Right. So we have to send as much information as we can overseas to try and get back what we're looking for.
And does someone from the production like travel to whatever studio is doing it overseas and kind of like check in or oversee, or do you have like a staff member or several out there wherever it's being animated that's kind of like overseeing the animators and stuff?
So like for today's time, we will do Skype weekly with them, right? We'll get online with them visually and kind of talk them through problems and issues. Try and work things through with them. But yes, every single show, there's at least one trip that you go overseas, usually when they're starting out, after you've gotten some test footage back. So you can go over there as the creator or showrunner and kind of walk them through a little more understanding of how these characters should move or how you want the timing to be interpreted. One last really boring thing. We have the other really important part about the show is there's this thing called X sheets. X sheets are, think of lined notebook paper, and each line represents a frame of film, okay? So when we send these storyboards over, go back to that analogy of a character who's grabbing a glass off of a table is one pose, and then maybe the next pose is them with the glass up to their mouth. On these X sheets, a timer is writing out On frame 2, the hand touches the glass. From frames 2 to 12, that glass is coming up to their mouth. It overshoots and settles in 4 frames. Like, it's this crazy other language of film that also travels overseas with the show to try and help the animators understand how to get back what we're looking for.
And do you make those, or who?
I can. I go over them, but there's usually sheet timers that deal with that
Sheet
situation.
timer, okay.
Yes. So there's all these different facets that are going on just to make one episode of animation. It's ridiculous.
So you're explaining this and being like, oh God, I'm sorry, this is boring. Like, this is like fascinating to me. It's like this. I'm like hanging on every word because I've never. No one's ever explained this to me before.
It's the one time I wish we had a way of doing visuals to kind of walk people through it. You know,
well, I will say, you sent me your website in advance, and you have a portfolio page with links to different animatics and storyboards.
Sure.
This. So if you don't mind, I will put some links to those in the show notes
Awesome.
of this podcast. So if you want to see what we're talking about, you can go into the show notes and click onto those links. Is there any part of you, as like the kid, like growing up in New Jersey, watching these cartoons as a big fan, you go to CalArts, you learn how to animate. Like, is there any part of you that like it like dies like when you ship this stuff overseas? Like, do you wish that it were kind of like the old days were just like a bunch of guys sitting around artist tables smoking cigarettes, like drawing like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, like that kind of thing?
For many people, there was a lot of times of drinking and smoking cigarettes. That's a part of getting through this job in this industry. Yeah, no, of course. The saddest thing was there was times in this industry where the job would get, I know it sounds so ridiculous because it's just cartoons that we're making, but for me at least, the stress would become super overwhelming, or I'd have so many struggles and issues. And my dad would have to remind me, he's like, man, there was a time that you would have given your right arm just to be saying that you worked in this industry.
Yeah.
So it's a good reminder to remind myself that, oh yeah, you get to see behind the curtain, and it just becomes more tasks and little boxes that you're trying to figure out. And it's always good to kind of step back again and go, wait a minute, this is this cool, magical thing that we're getting to do. And as cheesy as it sounds, the whole reason I wanted to get in this industry was with crap that went through my life and my times when I was growing up. Animation was a great escape for me because that was that time I'd put it on and I would laugh and have the best time no matter what the hell was going on. And so for me, it's like, that's why I wanted to do this. When I was little and I would draw Snoopy in the 4th grade, it was because people laughed and enjoyed what I was giving them, right? When I did, we used to have to cover our books in paper. And I would freaking design all over everyone's. I'd draw Opus and Garfield and Snoopy and whatever. Like, would just design the hell out of people's covers because I enjoyed seeing the reaction I got out of them. And so I have to remind myself constantly that when the job gets a little overwhelming, it's me that's letting it get overwhelming because I'm trying to make the best thing I can. But I'm really just here because it's about the fun of what I'm doing. Like, that's the part of what you're talking about that is the part that's amazing. As a kid, to think that I actually would have done what I've been able to do in this industry and the shows I've been able to work on. Again, one of the other things I'm going to brag about too was working on Phineas and Ferb was probably one of the best shows I've ever worked on.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about that because I mean that is like, to me, I mean that's one of the sort of most well-known sort of institutional television animation shows that's come out in the last 10, 20 years. I mean, it's been off the air for a bit now,
well,
right?
they keep showing it. It's the show that is proven itself over and over again because you can go on Disney Channel at any time and you'll see them rerunning episodes.
But that's what it hasn't. You haven't been making new episodes.
No, but they're doing a movie right now. So
I'm pretty breaking news! Here we go.
I think that's out there, but
what I was going to say is that like it's not a current series that's like airing, being promoted, new episodes. But my kids found it and just tore through the episodes, just like laughing hysterically. And my kids are 6.5. 6 and 4, and you could say that show's maybe a little older than that, like maybe meant for someone that's a little older. But even at 6 and 4, they loved that show, and like that's when I told them that you were coming over. I was like, oh, our neighbor that lives across the street, and I showed them that you worked on Phineas and Ferb. They're like, Phineas and Ferb, like that was the show they recognized.
That's awesome.
So
yeah, well, I mean that's like I said, that's probably one of my favorite times in this industry was working on that show, especially the first couple of years I was on it.
How did you, were you on it from the beginning?
So Dan Povenmire, one of the show's creators, Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh created that series. And I met Dan when I was on Family Guy. and we hit it off really well. And he sold that show to Disney and was somewhere in the beginning of the very first season when he realized that there's a lot to be done. I think it was when they were first getting their first color footage back. And there's a ton of work that comes into that stage as well that we can talk about later if we want to. But so he called me up and he's like, hey, I'd love to have you come work on this with me if you'd like to. This is what we're doing. And I had already seen the first pilot when he was working on it and made the decision that Family Guy that season was ending and I wasn't sure what was happening for the next season. And I had this offer and I'm like, man, this would be like the best, most exciting thing ever. And I believed in the show and the crew and the way it was run. And it shows. The show is wonderful. Like Dan and Swampy were the best showrunners in the sense that they knew how to let their artists underneath them explore and do what they did, but still kept everything in the same world. Does that make sense? Because all of us artists are going to bring our own way of telling a story, right? But by allowing them to really kind of explore, but still just kind of being the parent on top of it all is why I think that show is stronger than most everything out there. And I'm guilty of working on things where I've tried to drive people down my train and not let them do just that. But it really, really worked on that show. Again, talk about a story, premise-driven show. That's how that was run. And it from the ground up, from the first moment that the first thought went on a page, it was everyone yes-anding it and making it better and bringing it into this new world of yes-and means like, oh, what about this? And everyone kind of runs with that energy.
For anyone that's never studied improv, yes and.
yes and is just being being open to the positivity of what's being thrown out there.
You agree with the idea and then add something to it.
Yeah, and see if you can make it into something even better. Instead of just going, nah, instead of being negative on everything, you try and see if you can. And the people in the rooms were talented. They were strong. They brought their game. They brought their love. Everyone was laughing and having fun, and it shows on the screen, right? And that's what I'm talking about earlier. Like, to me, Phineas is also that dream come true job because I know for a fact, because of the amount of people that have watched that show, I may not be able to tell you what it is right off the top of my head, but I know for a fact that there's some line, some joke, something I did on that episode that people are still laughing about or quoting at school the next day, or when they're my age are going to be like doing a callback to that joke or that thing. Just that's the coolest thing ever to know that I've been involved in something that's going to last that long and that exciting, right?
Yeah. So you were on that show from the
beginning. Like there was a couple of episodes that had been done and we were getting our first color back. And then talk about getting thrown into the fire. I think it was literally the first week or second week I came on staff. Dan and Swampy had to go overseas to kind of meet, like I was talking about, to talk about the show, and kind of left me there alone. And right away there was a whole one of the board artists was out sick, and I had to step in and like do my own boards on the show, which is involved writing and like trying to understand and know these characters well enough. One of the coolest things ever especially on that show too, was when we did our storyboards, since they were coming from premise-driven boards, not only would you do it to just Dan and the immediate like writing crew, but when you got to a certain stage, you would pitch the show to the entire crew. So we would have storyboards pinned up on walls in an entire conference room, and you'd go around with your stick and you'd get everyone focused on you, and you'd go through each panel doing voices, pitching ideas, pitching the pacing and the energy. And it was like being a live stage performer because you'd get that immediate feedback. You'd know right there if something was working or not because you had an audience to kind of feed off of it.
That's fun.
So it's another reason that show was so successful, I think.
And so you did a bit of everything on that show, right? Like you didn't have just one title or one role. You kind of...
So the director role on that at first for me, the director role though involved, and again, part of this is me, if you leave a piece of paper out, I'm going to take a look at it kind of thing, right? If you open the door for me to get involved in something, I'm going to try my best to add what I can because it's just so exciting to be part of it. So on Phineas, exactly, I can remember being in the writer's room as they were breaking stories or going to the network to pitch stories and get them approved and trying to problem solve, to launching to the teams, to drawing boards and writing boards, to looking at X sheets, even writing things, and then something needed to be fixed on those X sheets I was talking to you about, designing characters, looking at color, editing, calling retakes. When we get color back, we have to call fixes for them, right? We don't have a way to reshoot or go look at other camera footage because it's all being created.
Right.
So you have to write notes for overseas to get things fixed. So I was even involved in calling retakes, involved in writing songs, not anywhere near the level I wanted to be, but I got to like write a couple of words and work on some songs with those guys. It was the coolest thing ever. And the crazy thing is, unlike Family Guy, I had a show in every one of those different areas going on at one time. So I could be in a meeting helping with a story, either breaking or launching or pitching it to an executive, to walking down the hallway to check in on a board, to going to look at sheets at my desk, to then going down, and all on different episodes.
Yeah.
So juggling 12, 15 episodes at one time was just an obvious, like just a regular thing there, which was exciting too, right?
Yeah.
Like turning a channel, like you'd walk into a room and turn the channel. I'm like, what are we looking at now? What are we talking about now? So it was fun.
That's fun. So how many years did you work on Phineas and Ferb?
I'm going to say it was around 5 years, something
5
like
years.
that. Again, I started off in a director spot, and then towards the end moved into a lesser role where I was kind of a storyboard supervisor with them, helping them out with the boards and overseeing all of that. And then left to go into a higher position when I left there to work on a show called Brickleberry for Comedy Central, which is a very adult show. So anyone watching this, if you haven't seen it, don't show that cartoon to your kids.
That's the one you told me not to.
Yes,
not to show to my children.
Although you should at least click on the original opening for the very first episode. It's only a couple seconds long. It's on my website. You'll get a good laugh out of it. It was. It'll show you what that kind of show is about. It's pretty funny.
I'll have to watch it. So you went to do what was the the role or title?
So that title was supervising director. Now, again, the titles get really wishy-washy around the studios. I was called the supervising director on that show, but the creators of that show, although they had a little bit of experience in animation and in drawing, they had not done TV production. So I came into that show as kind of like their mentor, I don't know if that's the right word, their expert, their person they would lean on. So they focused on the show itself, on the writing, on the comedy, on the overall feel of the show. And I sat there and worked with designers and helped take this original design pass that they got the show sold with and kind of broadened it a little bit, brought some of the animation to the next level without losing the intent of what they did, opening the color palettes, like those kinds of things, like to just kind of expand the show a little bit, and oversaw all the directors. So then now I'm above the director level, right? So I'm looking at still every board that's coming in, but a director's has already worked on that with a board artist. I might not have to be thumbnailing anything out for anyone unless there's something I have really specific. I let them do that first pass. Then it comes into me and I noodle and fix and tweak and have fun plussing or working with them on trying to make things better. It's a very collaborative effort that way. And so that's what I did on 2 seasons of that show.
So where are you now in your career? Like, what's the most recent thing you worked on?
So the last thing I did was a show for Nickelodeon. I was supervising producer on that show. So again, just kind of going on up those ranks. And that was for a show for Nickelodeon. It was a live action show that's a huge live action hit called Henry Danger. And they wanted to do a spinoff into an animated series. The show creator had done something on the web. He had done these web comics that were very limited animation, and they seemed to get some really good response. And so they just wanted to bring someone on to help make that into an actual series. Unfortunately, quality-wise, I'm not as excited about what the end result was on that. I think we ran into a lot of issues in production. I can point fingers many ways, but and the show, I think, really would have opened up quite a bit in the second season. Real quick again, so this show was a live action show about a superhero man who needed a sidekick and hired this young kid to come be his sidekick. And it's like every kid's little dream, right? They can get to go be as cool as Batman to Batman, not Robin necessarily, but as cool, like this cool sidekick. And but in the live action world, especially for TV, you can't go having them fighting 20-story tall monsters over the bridge of San Francisco, because you just can't afford to do that in that kind of a budget.
Right.
So most of their stuff was kept very much to a sitcom world. And the idea was, well, now that we're going to go into animation, we can finally take advantage of all that stuff that they're not doing in the live action show. Unfortunately, none of the scripts really took full advantage of that. Dan Schneider, the creator of that show, was a genius at creating huge hits for Nickelodeon. And these characters were amazing and they were funny. And he continued to write sitcom type style animated shows that had a little bit of that in there. But I still think, again, not to be negative on anyone, I think if the show had gone on like they were originally going to do a second season of, I think we could have broadened that out quite a bit and really taken advantage of it. The other main thing, the quality of the animation on that show didn't work out. We were trying a different system with a brand new studio with a studio that was new at doing this system, and the show kind of feels limited in its approach and its final look. And when you're up against budgets and deadlines, you can only do so much.
Yeah.
So for that, it was kind of a defeating end game to it. What I will always say to everyone, the show looks 10 times better than it has any right to because of all the hurdles we did go through. And there's so many of them, from just productions or getting time with Dan or all these issues that we had for what the show looks like at the end of the day. And again, it killed in the ratings because it had this following already. So Loud House, which is one of the top shows on Nickelodeon right now, which everyone out there in the animation world knows, and it's a really well done show, we were still even beating it sometimes with our ratings numbers in a time when you can't get ratings. So for whatever that's worth, at least it did what it was supposed to do. Just for me personally, for what I wanted out of the show, I didn't get exactly what I wanted out of it.
Yeah. I mean, we've all worked on shows that don't go anywhere. I think anyone in TV has had that.
Well,
I've worked on shows that have, like, I don't even want to tell you about because they're so embarrassing. But here's a question. So I've noticed a lot, like on Netflix or Amazon Prime, that studios are taking their movie properties and spinning them out into these animated series.
Sure.
So, like, I think Kung Fu Panda has one. I think DreamWorks is doing
DreamWorks is doing a lot of that. They're doing that with Boss Baby and Trolls and Kung Fu Panda and the Croods. Like they're having a whole giant market for that.
So are those what are those being run and produced the same way that these animated shows are, or is there something about CG and computer animation that's like sort of changing the way that these are being made and making them more affordable? Because it seems like they're just like cranking these shows out.
I think it's more because that's what's the pulse of the world right now is into the CG world. Mm-hmm. I think you're seeing a lot more, features that way, which is why it's also going that way for television. I think that's just what the formula that's working for the entertainment right now. I don't know that it's necessarily easier. I don't think it's simpler. I don't think it's any cheaper necessarily. There's different hurdles you have to overcome when you're dealing in a 3D world. So I don't know. I think it's more of just that's the pulse that's out there right now, and that's what DreamWorks is starting from, right? Like think about what they're doing. They're betting on properties that are going to be somewhat of a success before you even. Like I give a lot of credit to Nickelodeon and Disney, and even DreamWorks is still doing their own independent properties as well. But that's a big risk, right? Think about what Netflix is doing. Apple's kind of doing the same thing. Apple's producing all kinds of content, live action, animation. And from what I understand in the beginning, they're either going with a home run hitter like a Steven Spielberg or some name that's going to probably bring some kind of credibility to the show, or they're using properties that have already been established.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the same thing that Netflix was smart enough to do. Let's let DreamWorks do properties that we know are already working. The films did fine out there. They have a following already. We know that we're safe by going that way.
So there's not like a snobbery in the animation industry about like it was like, oh, hand drawn is like, oh, that's the best. Like CG, like, oh, of course you could do that. Like
I would think there's snobbery that definitely happens, and I think it's more from genre to genre, or it's from features. And this happens in writing too. Yeah. When you work in live action versus animation, there's kind of this unfortunate, sad thing of it's kind of almost frowned upon, I guess. I don't know. But I think like features at one point definitely was held as the highest pinnacle to get to, and then you had TV underneath that. But we've seen it happening in live action as well as it's happened in animation. There's some been pretty groundbreaking shows that have come out in the TV world that are stepping all over what features are doing, whether it's animation or live action, right? Yeah. So I think that if there's any snobbery, there's still some there at times. But it's like I've seen it happen on both sides. I've seen people take storyboard artists or directors or artists from features and put them into the TV world where the pace is going like this and the decisions have to be made quicker than you can imagine and there's no time to really do any reference or research or whatever. And they feel what that pressure is like and have more of an appreciation for it, and vice versa. What those guys are doing in features is a completely different beast than what we do in TV. There's a different mindset to the entire thing. And I've talked about with people, one of the reasons I've never really dove into features as far as storyboarding, I would love to do it at some point, except for you can board a sequence multiple times, rework the thing until you've done it 20, 30 times, spend a year more like redoing something, and then it gets cut from the film and you never even get to see it make the light of day. For me, I need to know that what I'm doing at the end of the day is going to be seen by somebody. That's part of what I got into this industry for. And even though at TV, the amount of episodes that I've worked on, if I were to add them up, is ridiculous. But they have, because you're moving through them so quickly, they are what they are at the end of the day, right?
Right. So at some point you have to just be like, okay, we're moving on. It's good enough, and here we go.
And because of it, you also make happy accidents too that make things really wonderful and exciting. And because you're just playing in that world, they become something that you could never even have expected if you had the time to slow down and really think about it. So.
Yeah. So your next thing you mentioned, you're doing some Peanuts thing for Apple.
Yeah. So in addition to that, real quick too, going back to one of the first things I did in the industry was pitching my own ideas, right? So just this past fall, I got together with a writing partner that works at Disney, and we came up with a show pitch that we took around to the studios that was getting some really good feedback and excitement. So there's still that dream. There's still that idea of...
You want to create and sell your own show.
Yeah. I mean, because look, I've now spent all the time working in every area. I'm not someone who's just walking right out of school and stepping into showrunner level. I've done every job underneath it. I've been to mixing of sound and post. I've spotted for sound effects, which is looking at a show and calling out what sound effects you need and calling out music cues. And I've done it all. I've directed voice talents at the booths when we're recording voice actors. I've helped pick who the voice talents are. Like, I've done everything all the way through, and it just would be like the perfect, wonderful thing that now that I've got all this experience underneath me, if the idea is the right thing, to now put all that to practice would be the best. So there's that. Who knows if that'll ever work? It's something that a lot of us aim for in this industry and never get, but it's fun to be alive with that again. I haven't worked on my own pitch in a while, so it's really exciting. And then on top of that, while I'm looking to figure out what my next kind of in-house gig is going to be, and we should talk about that in a minute too, I signed up I'm going to be working on actually doing boards again for a Peanuts special, or Peanuts show that's going to be done for Apple. I don't know how much I can really talk about it other than that.
I heard Apple's really strict about their non-disclosure. And
I think all I can say is that I'm working on a Peanuts thing for Apple, because I think that's
I think
you can find that in Variety.
Life already, just because this hasn't even aired yet, and there's someone knocking on the door.
Unfortunately, I can't say much than that, but I'm having so much fun because, again, one of the stories I didn't get to share, the very first thing I was doing was drawing Snoopy characters and Peanut characters. And as a really young kid, I would just trace them, because as a little kid, you get paper. Mm-hmm. You can't get really nice quality paper as a kid, so you can see through it. And I would trace these pictures and bring them into school and give them to friends. And all of a sudden, at one point, I remember a whole bunch of kids surrounding me saying that they thought that I was tracing all these and they didn't think I could draw them. And I'm sweat's beating up. And I'm like, now you wonder why I get so nervous around people when I have to draw in front of them. But because I had traced it and drawn it so many times, the muscle memory and the artist in me kicked in, and I was able to draw it. And like, everyone just kind of was like, and then just kind of walked away. But I was like, wow, how cool is it that like one of the first things I did in this world of art for me was drawing Snoopy characters. Now I'm finally going to actually get to work on one. It's kind of cool. Like,
that is really cool.
Look, we all grew up with those specials, right? The Christmas or the Halloween one. It's kind of nice to work on something that hopefully will be as strong as those were. We can only hope.
Awesome. I can't wait to see it.
But one of the things I was going to talk about is just another quick thing about the industry. I've also been very lucky to where I got into the industry and made a reputation for myself with the people I worked with. I'm a hard worker. I do well at what I do. And most every job for years would be before the job would end. Because think about it, you have a show that's however many months it takes to produce the show. From an artistic standpoint, there's still a longer tail end of going through post and putting all the sound on it. If you're not in a director level, you're looking for your next job.
Right.
for years and years and years.
You're working as a freelance, basically.
Well, you get brought onto a show. So when I went to go work on Phineas and Ferb, I was hired on there, and I signed a contract, and I was on for that season. And then when the season's over, because they don't know if they're doing more, they can't guarantee you anything. You then have to either look for another job or wait for that show to get picked up. That's the other thing I wanted to share was that, especially in animation, it isn't something that you get in and you're like, yeah, I'm at Disney for life or I'm at Pixar for life. You get a job and you're only as settled there as you are for that project. So it's something you have to constantly keep in mind that you're on a constant. So I'm like a studio whore. We all are. We wind up, I'm sleeping with Disney one season or two, and then I'm over at Nickelodeon, then I'm back at Cartoon Network, and then I'm over at Warner Brothers. So on the one hand, it's really exciting because you get to go and work on different projects. It's also kind of daunting because you're like always sitting there going, well, what's the next show? What is there going to be one ready? Am I moving on to that next thing? I've got mortgage to pay and mouths to feed and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah. I'm in the same exact boat, and I don't know if people listening will be surprised to hear that, but that's especially the case too in reality TV. I mean, you're very much just project to project, show to show, and you can get gigs in my world. You can get gigs that last as short as a month, or you can end up. And I've been lucky to end up on a show and at a company where I've been there consistently now for several years.
That's awesome.
But it could go away in an instant, right? The network could say like, we're not bringing it back, or that they could just be like, well, we're just gonna bring someone else in or whatever. So it's not an industry that if you're looking for something that's like stability, 401k, gold watch after 30 years.
Yeah, we don't get bonuses, we don't get any of that stuff, right? I mean, that's the one thing that's really, I have to give credit to the studios too, like Nickelodeon, Disney, Cartoon Network. When they have you in there, they try their best to keep you moving on. They don't want to lose the talent, right? Because if they go from one show to 5 shows, they'd rather have talented people around. Yeah. So they've been really good about trying to float people and keep people around, especially if they feel that they're a talent worthwhile keeping. But it's still, there's no guarantee. I mean, because shows could just all be done at some time. You don't know. So that was the only reason I was bringing that up for anyone that's just wondering. It's not the banking job or the whatever business job where you get into the company and you can stay here for life. You are constantly, which is kind of good. I guess it keeps you hungry and it keeps you wanting to get better and stronger, and it doesn't ever let you be complacent. But on the flip side, there is that thing where it's like, it'd be nice to just know what I'm doing for a while.
Yeah, it can cause sleepless nights and maybe a panic attack or two when you're like, I don't know how I'm going to afford my kids' preschool.
Oh, every once in a while, I'll walk into Target and be like, Target greeter, huh? You know what you're doing every day. It's not.
I may have looked up what it takes to become an Uber driver, maybe. To do on the weekends. But well, we've been lucky.
Well, and again, like you said, at the end of the day, even when those panic attacks come in and I start thinking through that side of an alternate life, man, I would never survive in those worlds. Like, I have to be creative. My personality, my energy, my youth of just being ridiculous and stupid and what I like, I couldn't be a banker or a business salesman. Like, I don't know if that would work with my personality.
You don't even know the names of the jobs. A business sales thing. I don't know.
A money maker. Some guy who has a house in some other state and can afford. Anyway. But yeah, so that's I don't know what else to add to that.
So what would you say for someone that is at this point? Now you said you got in at 89 into CalArts. So we're 2019. We're, what is that, 20, 30 years? Whoa, 30 years, man. So if someone...
That's 12 years. That's only been 12 years.
So nowadays, what would you recommend if there's someone that's listening that's like drawing, peanut characters, or maybe it's something different today, and they dream about being an animator? What's that path? Like, what's the advice for those people that want to get into it?
Awesome question. So the number one thing that I would always say to everyone everywhere, and they will always say this to you talk to anyone in this industry, is just to draw all the time. That's the number one thing I can say. If you want to be involved in animation, especially, drawing everywhere. If there's napkins in front of you, pull out a pen and draw on them. If you've got a sketchbook you can bring with you. And I preach this and don't do it enough, but some of the top people I know in this industry, that's how they were in the beginning, and they try and keep it with them as much as they can, because that's all you're doing all day long is drawing, right? So the more you get those bad drawings out of your way and get that muscle memory and get those hands to work and do what you want them to do, that the more you can do that, the easier life will be in the industry. Taking classes and understanding how to draw the anatomy and understanding all that can only help. It's not about tracing and it's not about copying, right? There's a way to learn from those. Like I was talking about in the very beginning, there's a way to study that Snoopy and go, what are they doing there? What's the gesture there? What's the line of action? How are they breaking up these shapes? What's the proportions? Why are those more appealing than if I made different choices to that, right? And then the other thing is to study film and understand it. Try and understand and take classes and listen to all those commentaries that are done by people that know what they're talking about. And try and understand a film from not from just someone who goes to be entertained. There's something wonderful about that. But try and understand why they're making the choices they're making, because it will just help you be a better film. Like I'm a filmmaker, right? So it just helps you to be a better filmmaker across the board. Then obviously trying to get into the best school you can get into. CalArts is expensive. It took me forever to pay it off. It's even more expensive now. I don't think you have to go to that school to get into the industry. It's just a heck of a lot harder. Right. The other thing I've told everyone else is that other thing. Look at what I did. I got my foot in the door somehow. That's the number one thing. If you're not that person that's showing that portfolio and getting immediately hired and getting into whatever you're trying to do, don't be afraid to try and get in there and do everything else, because you'll see what you need to work on. You'll build relationships with people that will then try and help you get better and get into that position. Yeah. So that's the other best thing I can say to someone is don't be afraid to take that PA position somewhere. In fact, be the best freaking PA on the set. Like, again, when I was doing that, I was the first one in the building every morning and shut off all the lights on the way out. I didn't have to be, but when I got there, I was there before everyone else. And the producers saw that, the animators saw that, they saw my enthusiasm, they saw my energy, and then people want to help you when that's who you are, right? Yeah. So don't be afraid to do that and put in the extra effort. So, drawing, studying film, and then if you're lucky enough to get to like a CalArts or like I said, I heard Fullerton. There's a lot of schools out there. There's a lot of basics that you can learn. I still think from what I understand CalArts, they still do it one of the best ways about how they teach you and what you're getting, the films you're making, what the rules and the structures are about how you make films are all to teach you certain things. And some of the best people in this industry have gone through that.
Awesome. Well, Zac, thank you so much. You have like a very contagious energy and passion. And it's just like so clear, like how much you love what you do, how much you love storytelling and animation and stuff. So I think people are really going to enjoy listening to this. I know I enjoy this and I've learned a ton. So thanks for coming over.
Sure.
Are you good to drive home? You're not going to fall asleep at the wheel?
I don't know. I hope so. Hopefully I can figure out where I parked. I can't even remember where I parked. Oh wait, my driveway. I parked on my driveway.
So many dad jokes. All right, that was my chat with Zac Moncrief. Make sure to check the show notes of this week's episode because Zac has a lot of great material like storyboards and animatics, artwork that he's done that I'm going to link to in the notes of the show. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you haven't already, please do me a big favor. Go on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you're listening, and subscribe, leave a rating, or write a review for the show. It's really going to help me out. If you want to reach out to me, I would love to hear from you. You can email me. It's show, SHOW, @workingclasshollywood.com. Or you can find me on Instagram. It's Working Class Hollywood. Thank you guys again, and I will see you next time.